Hey there everybody, Nathan Elson here. Welcome to the first video of 2024. Now today I'm going to talk to you about using 3 lights in the studio to create high-key portraits. Now the whole idea of a 3-light setup has become a huge part of my photography arsenal, and oftentimes when you think about high-key portraits, you picture, bright, airy, beautiful, kind of contrasty high-key portraits, and I'm going to show you how I create those. But not only that, I'm going to show you how I also use that 3-light setup to create an image that's got a lot more intrigue. It's a little bit darker, a little bit moodier, but we're still using the exact same gear. It'll make a lot more sense once we get into the actual video. So with that being said, let's just get into it. Now, when it comes to shooting on a white backdrop, especially a pure white backdrop, there's a few different fundamentals that you need to understand in order to pull this off correctly. And the first thing is that your backdrop needs to actually be overexposed by about 1 to 1.5 stops over your key light. Now, what that means is if your key light is metered to say f8 at ISO 100, that means that your backdrop needs to be metered to around f11 to f13 at ISO 100 in order to actually overexpose the backdrop so you get that pure white. If that backdrop isn't actually overexposed, it's going to fall to a light gray and you're not going to get that pure white look. If you go above that, if you start getting into 3 or 4 stops and you just hammer it with light, you're gonna get this weird ghosting effect where the light starts wrapping around and it makes everything feel very, very soft. So you can't overexpose it by too much, but you have to definitely overexpose it by enough to get that pure white backdrop. Now, when it comes to actually lighting the backdrop, my modifier of choice is a medium umbrella. Now, the reason for this is it gives you a perfect broad throw of light, so you're getting even lighting across the entire backdrop, but the modifiers aren't so large that they're getting in the way of the setup, and they're really easy to carry from one location to another. And lastly, you want to angle the umbrellas so that you're getting proper coverage over your entire backdrop. Just make sure you don't angle them so much that that light is hitting directly onto your model. Otherwise, you're going to get these really harsh rim lights that are overblown, and it's going to kind of eliminate the entire feel of the portraits that we're trying to create with this look. Now, with that being said, you are actually going to get some kickback from that white backdrop onto your model that's going to cause these little highlights on various parts that are turned towards the backdrop. And the way to control that is the distance from the model to the backdrop. Now, I personally like to keep my model around 2 to 3 feet from the backdrop so I get little hints of that rim light. I just feel like it adds to the overall look of the portrait, but again, it's a personal preference and you can adjust that as needed. And finally, for my key light, I'm using a 47-inch deep octa with the parabolic arm from Strobe Pro, and this is honestly one of my favorite modifiers I own. It just combines this beautiful soft light with the indirect light that's happening from the light firing into the modifier, then coming back out, but it also combines with the hardness that you get from not having any diffusion material on the modifier itself. So you get this beautiful mix of soft meets hard lighting that just adds these beautiful little accents to the skin. And just every time I use it, I'm blown away by how amazing the light looks coming out of this modifier. And I can never figure out why I don't use it more often. I mean, honestly, one of the reasons I don't use it more often is it's kind of a pain in the ass to put together. But honestly, every time I do, I'm just like blown away by how beautiful the light is that comes out of it. But with that being said, when you combine all 3 of these lights together, this is what it ends up looking like. So now let's take those 3 lights and create another high-key portrait that just has a little bit more mood to it. Now, I'm still using the same medium umbrellas on my backdrop that are overexposing the backdrop by about 1 to 1.5 stops over my key light, so I'm getting that pure white background. Now, for my key light, I've opted for a large umbrella with the diffusion panel attached. Now, what this diffusion panel does is it actually softens the transition from my highlights to my shadows. Now, not only that, I've taken the umbrella and I've brought it around more to the side of the model. Now, what this does is it creates more shadow in the sides of her face and body. And shadow is one of the things that I use to create drama in a portrait. It just adds a little bit more depth, it adds a little bit more intrigue, it makes things a little bit more interesting. So with that modifier slightly off to the side, using the exact same 3-light setup, well, this is what the images end up looking like. Now, Now this final image is definitely the most dramatic and moody of them all, and it's because I'm actually using the backdrop as my key light. So I'm still using those medium umbrellas and I'm firing them into the backdrop, but I'm using the light that's coming from the backdrop as my key. So that light is hitting my backdrop and it's wrapping around my model. Now, if I didn't add any more light except for that background light, I would end up with this silhouette effect, and that's not really what I was going for. I still want to be able to see my model. So I've taken that large, deep umbrella with the diffusion panel attached, and I've brought it further back in the studio, and I'm just adding a little bit of fill light back into my image just to bring out some of those details. Now, the reason I have the light so far back is so that I get a perfectly even throw of light from her head down to her toes that's just filling in the areas evenly that are otherwise going to fall into complete darkness. And I only want to add in just enough light so you can still make out her body and her form, and she's not essentially turning into a silhouette. You're still getting to see the details, but it's still sort of this like really dark meets really light type of portrait. So with that, when you combine these three lights, again, this is what it ends up looking like. And so there you have it. That's 3 ways that I use 3 light setups to create various high key portraits. And make sure that if you guys use any of this information, you send me a link. I don't know, use the comments, hit me an email, whatever it is. I love to see what you guys create with the information that I provide to you. But with that being said, I'll see you guys all in the next video. Cheers.